I grew up on the left. I've always been on the left. I was an anarcho punk rock skateboarder when I was a teenager, and now I'm just more of a moderate, social liberal, anti-authoritarian type. I've traveled the world, and I can tell you, as I make many videos about these stories, the world is not fair. The world is not safe. The United States is relatively fair and relatively safe, but some things exist in physical reality that you can't do anything about. On average, men are taller than women, have more muscle mass, more bone density, more skin collagen, on average. What that means is, on average, you will likely see more circumstances where women are victimized by men. It's just literally statistics, it's math. In the event that a man is attacked by a man, which happens more often, actually. My understanding is that crime statistics show that men are more likely to be victims of violent crime, but I believe it's fair to point out that a man is more likely to be able to defend themselves. More likely, right? I'm talking about general averages, not individuals. We have this story from the New York Times. Adventurous, alone, attacked. The number of female solo travelers has skyrocketed. But amid Instagram-worthy escapades are tales of violence and death, raising questions about how the world is greeting women who travel alone. Many people grow up in the United States where they have a voice, they have power, because we've built one of the greatest systems in the history of the planet. When a woman, for instance, maybe even a woman of color, this woman in particular, when she wants to speak up, though she will face some challenges in some circumstances, she will also face many privileges in many circumstances. This is unprecedented for most of the world. Now, things are getting better around the world, absolutely. But you will find that in many countries, they don't care what you think. They don't care who you are, and they will not protect you under any circumstances. This story talks about many women who travel the world alone and have been injured. I'm not entirely sure who this woman is. This is Hannah Gavios in Queens, New York. We can see that she's using 2 walking sticks, presumably injured, if that's the story is about. The story starts with, let's read a little bit before we get into the philosophical. Carla Stefaniak did everything right, her best friend said. On a 5-day vacation in Costa Rica to celebrate her 36th birthday. She was a dual Venezuelan-American citizen. She chose a gated Airbnb near the airport, had a security guard. It was a safe neighborhood. Miss Stefaniak never boarded her flight home. During their phone call, Miss Stefaniak had made a strange remark to this. She said the situation felt sketchy. Carla knew at 8:20 that night that something was wrong. Miss Jamie said in an interview, sometimes we justify our intuition, but when something is triggered and our body says something is wrong, you have to listen to it. A week later, her body was found, wrapped in plastic and buried in a sloping patch of forest near her Airbnb rental. Yes, she was murdered. She did everything right. Gated Airbnb security guard, apparently, I believe it was the security guard who perpetrated the crime. They say recent headlines about deadly violence inflicted on women traveling alone have raised questions about how the world is greeting the documented rise in female solo travelers and about the role of social media in promoting the idea that far-off lands are easily accessible and safe. They aren't. How many stories? In fact, this story actually goes over several women. In December, the bodies of Louisa Vesterager Jespersen, 24 of Denmark, and Maren Ueland, 28 of Norway, were found with knife wounds in their necks in the high Atlas Mountains of Morocco. Danish officials called the murders an act of terror. The same month, the Briton Grace Mullane disappeared in Auckland, New Zealand, on the night before her 22nd birthday. Auckland, New Zealand, of all places. She was found slain days later. In 2015, a 19-year-old British backpacker was gang raped by bikers in Thailand. In March, an Australian man was convicted of kidnapping and raping a Belgian traveler seeking work after keeping her locked up in his pig shed for 2 days. We have evidence that shows that women face risks that men don't face in public spaces, at home, wherever they may be. Executive Director of UN Women, an organization that promotes female equality. Increasingly, wherever they may be includes alone in foreign countries, of course. Now, it's a fact. Men also face these issues. Men have also been killed in many of these circumstances. But the point that I want to bring up is not to try and make some claims about who is victimized more, but to make a simple point about the idea of social justice. It works when your society agrees. We will protect. We will. Around the world, you don't have these cultural norms and social protections. If you're a woman, you are at a substantial disadvantage because about half of the people you'll interact with on average, will be taller, stronger, faster. And so you really do need to protect yourself. One of the reasons I wanted to bring this up is because they bring up a few things that I think are very important. Let me try and scroll through this, try and find this. One woman who actually traveled, holds the record, I believe. Let me see if I can find it. It's a woman who has the record for visiting every country on the planet. And she learned Krav Maga, I believe. It was a long story. It talks about a ton of issues. So let's, here we go. Seasoned solo travelers say that preparation can be the key to minimizing risk. Cassie Day Picole, 29, who in 2017 claimed the title of the first woman to visit every country traveling alone, means having a long list of precautions. The Connecticut-born activist practices Krav Maga, an Israeli self-defense technique. She carries a GPS tracker. She makes sure someone knows where she is at all times. Some of these might sound extreme, but I attribute having safely traveled to 196 countries alone to these specific procedures. I want to highlight this for a second. A woman who's been able to go to every country in the world, holds a record for it, and she practiced self-defense, Krav Maga. As I mentioned, and I'm not trying to be sexist or anything. No, it's true on average. Biological males will have more muscle mass, taller, etc. Krav Maga, seriously, Krav Maga is impressive. That's going to give you a massive advantage over the average individual. A determined woman who trains, prepares, and especially in something like Krav Maga is going to be able to whoop ass, to basically every person they meet. Not, it's not a guarantee. Unfortunately, if you're like 4'10" and there's a 6'5" dude, you can still, get some grappling techniques off. It's going to protect you. You're better off training. But sometimes, even if you're the biggest, strongest guy in the world, you can't fight a grizzly bear. The point is, sometimes people are bigger, smaller, and there's going to be threats. What's interesting, Ms. Day Picole says that gender-based violence is an unfortunate reality for women who travel. The awareness of needing to always watch our backs when we're both alone and in public places is something that men don't necessarily need to be aware of. That's wrong. It's wrong. They do. Absolutely. I have been to these places. I have a thing right here in my wall for the security training I've done for going. And let me read some of it. It says, pre-deployment, personal safety, first aid, vehicle safety, conflict management, medical trauma, battlefield awareness, and kidnap avoidance are just some of the things that I've had to train in. It would be absurd to imply that men in general don't. No. Everyone does. The issue is that in a circumstance where it comes to violence, men, on average, will be able to hold their own against another average man. It's not guaranteed. It's just, these are just global averages in body size. And, if a Norwegian woman on average who's taller goes to like Thailand, where people on average are smaller, it's going to be very different. You have to take these things into consideration. This is where it gets interesting. We have this woman, Jessica Nabongo, 34, on a mission to become the first black woman to visit every country in the world. Born in Detroit, she has been to 158 countries so far, 54 of them alone, and hopes to complete her journey in October. Ms. Nabongo acknowledged that we tell women what not to do to avoid being attacked instead of telling men not to attack women. It's a really interesting perspective that makes sense in a country with laws. It makes sense in the United States. Sort of. Not even entirely. This blew my mind when I got to this portion of the article. The idea that you're going to try and travel the world and think you're going to tell a dude in, the Philippines that he should adhere to American cultural standards. Should they not attack women? Well, of course. In the United States, we have cultural norms. And yes, you can tell people not to attack women. For the most part, in our culture, we do. It's a crime to attack anyone. So it's kind of absurd, in my opinion, that you will have someone who claims, well, instead of telling them to defend themselves, we should tell men not to attack women. Listen, 99.9% of men won't. A small percentage will. Telling them not to won't change the fact that they're criminals, that they're deranged. And it's really fascinating to me because I can understand where this argument comes from in a Western privileged society like America, where attacks are actually rather rare and violence is going down. But to want to travel the entire world, to go to Morocco, to go to Libya or Central Africa and act like you're going to tell a man not to attack a woman, in these countries, they're going to say, I don't care what you want. I really don't. And they're going to do horrifying things. So it's amazing to see the contrast between a woman who will train in Krav Maga and a woman who says, we should be telling men not to attack women. She says she dresses conservatively until she can assess whether what she wears matters in the place she is visiting. She would prefer a world where women can just pack up and travel without having to do the extra legwork that solo male travelers don't have to do, but says that's idealistic. I would say this. I don't believe there is anything a man shouldn't do that a woman should. Period. I mean that seriously. If you are preparing to travel the world and you are going somewhere dangerous or outside of your bubble, a man and a woman should be doing the exact same things. Men and women face different threats, and this is where the reality of the world is. It's important, but I feel like, it's predominantly young millennial leftists going on their Instagram adventures who don't understand what the world is really like. You grow up in this privileged bubble, and you think the worst thing ever is being insulted or something. I know that's rather extreme, but a lot of these people do. And they want to go visit these countries where the worst thing that ever happened is a woman had her hair pulled back and a machete put to her throat and her head removed from her body. You want to talk about the reality of the world? I was in a country where I watched people use makeshift shotguns and kill a guy. These things happen. The real world isn't a safe space. It's a dangerous space. I've been to many countries, okay? Not as many of these people. I think I've been maybe like 25 to 30. And many of them are safe. They are. You can, for the most part, I've said this to people aren't crazy. If they want to rob you, if they want to take something from you, they will. Sometimes people are crazy though. Sometimes they're angry and sometimes they're desperate. Things get more dangerous outside of your safety bubble and outside of places like the United States. For many of these people to think that you can just travel the world and it'll be fun. There's one woman, there's a lot of stories in here. This story here is really rather horrifying. A woman who's on a motorcycle trip was pinned down by 3 men. They destroyed her motorcycle and raped her. These things happen. So here's the thing. One of the challenges that I try to explain to people, political correctness, in my opinion, plays a huge role in damaging the safety and hurting women in at least some capacities. Of course, there's good things about it. When I was doing my hostile environment training, someone asked if women should take different precautions than men. And the person doing the training stuttered and stammered. Why? Because in the United States, there are EEOC laws. If he came out and said that women are substantially more likely to be raped and men were more likely to be murdered, he can get in trouble. That's sexist. If he said women are facing more danger, need to be more careful, he could get in trouble. That's sexist. As we've seen, the woman said men should be told not to attack women. This is one of the common narratives we hear when it comes to safety. These feminists posting things saying like, how about you teach men not to rape? And it's like, you realize we have a show called Law and Order Special Victims Unit. And the whole premise is about sex crimes predominantly perpetrated against women. Like 98, like some ridiculous percentage of the episodes are about this. I think it's fair to point out that our society, it's a felony. And you get put on a registration for the rest of your life, and you're basically, your life is destroyed if you do these things. I think people understand it's wrong, but some people don't care because they're bad people. We then tell women in training courses, oh no, don't worry. The response I got from the guy in training was men can be raped too. It's like they didn't address the question. He just said it. He's right though. Men can be. But I'll tell you what, at least in my experience, you're much more likely as a man to be beaten. It's going to be political. It's going to be for money or murdered. Women are much more likely to be sexually abused or actually sold into slavery. Men probably, it's a fight. It's a struggle. So they're like, what do I need to do for? Kill them. Women, on the other hand, are worth money. We do have the slave trade happening in North Africa. These things happen. When you live in the U.S. and you see these beautiful Instagram photos and you see these smiles and people going to these places, people don't seem to understand how terrifying things can really be. There was a story recently on Reddit of a woman in Austin, Texas, and a bunch of people drove up and tried snatching her and throwing into a car. Because as it turns out, even in the United States, people will come here from, say, like the south of the border, and they will kidnap American women to sell them in Central and South America into sex slavery. The world is not always a happy and beautiful place. One of the most terrifying stories that I've ever tried pursuing is rape safaris in the United States, where there are people who go in cars. It's like underground extremism, where they actually go to Native American reservations and chase down young women to gang rape them, and they're hired to do this. It was a crazy story. I was working on it at Vice with some people who were giving us tips, but getting trying to cover that story, it's impossible. Like, it's not entirely impossible, but the point is, We had sources telling us these things happened. We confirmed some of these sources with their stories about it. And you can read them in, I think, like the New York Times. These things happen in the United States. And so it always troubles me that there are so many people who think they can just go to Morocco. And we hear these stories. Now, look, listen. These stories are rather rare. You can travel the world and be safe. But I'll just say one more thing before signing off. For the love of God, train in Krav Maga. Seriously, jiu-jitsu, some kind of grappling technique. Learn how to put someone into a submission hold. All of these important things. Carry some kind of self-defense mechanism. I'm not saying necessarily a weapon, just something to protect yourself. GPS trackers. These things can be really important depending on what circumstances you're traveling the world in. If you're a journalist in hostile territory, I wouldn't recommend a GPS necessarily. There's a bigger conversation about how to keep yourself safe when you're engaging in political, international politicals in the international political sphere. Final thought. The world can be dangerous. And these stories we hear time and time again. Men can be hurt and killed. Women as well. But women, I think, especially need to take care of themselves and protect themselves. The world isn't always going to be so safe and happy. And as long as we have these narratives from the regressive left and intersectional feminism saying, teach men not to, that's the really, really bad advice, especially for people who want to go to Europe and travel the world. No, you need to prepare yourself, because sometimes people don't care what you tell them. We tell them don't commit a crime. They say they won't, and they do anyway. I'll leave it there. Thanks for hanging out. I'll see you at 4 p.m. on my main channel, youtube.com/Timcast. Yes, it is a different channel.